Why, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This video is going to be looking with our sort of first delve into the rules of the Genestealer cults in 10th edition. That is to say, with their new codex that was released a couple of weeks ago. This particular video will be focusing on their army rule, which is called Cult Ambush. I'll be discussing roughly what the rule is. I'll explain it because it's very wordy and actually somewhat hard to understand. But once you get your head around it, it's not too bad. And then after that, I'll be kind of reviewing it, giving a first impression, so to speak. And you'll be surprised to know, because there's a lot of people grumbling about this new Cult Ambush rule because it existed in the index at the beginning of 10th edition, and objectively, no doubt, it has been degraded. It is not anywhere near as good as it used to be, but at the end I'll be describing why I actually believe it's potentially, in the grand scheme of things, as good, if not better, than it ever used to be. And so with that in mind, let's begin. So first of all, let's ask ourselves, what is Cult Ambush? Well, it's the army rule for Genestealer cult armies. That is to say that by playing Genestealer cults, you get to use this rule, this ability, regardless of whatever detachment you choose, whatever models you bring, no matter what the mission of the game that you're playing may be, you always get this rule just for being a Genestealer cultist. And our rule is a rather thematic one. The Genestealer cults themselves are rebellious upstarters, if you wish. They are there to usurp the authoritative grip of the Imperium, or whatever is the ruling body of the planet that they are a part of, and they are to ultimately seeking the demise of that authoritative power. They are trying to destroy it and weaken the planet so that when the Tyranids, their star children themselves, arrive, the planet is already ready and willing to be taken up where the sun don't shine. And to achieve this, the Genestealer cultists, well, they get around a bit. They make these plans, these grand schemes within the shadows of society, far from the prying eyes of the authorities and the lawbringers, and over generations they insidiously spread their number, so that on the day of uprising, the day when the patriarch goes, it's time to take this planet, well, when they move out, their numbers are countless and may very well outnumber the native non-Genestealer population itself. And within the game, this is represented by, as I say, this special rule called Cult Ambush, where ultimately, as the battle goes on, more and more cultists come out from hidden locations, from sewers or from warehouses, or the locals just rally to the cause of the cult, eager to rid themselves of the shackles and authoritative dictatorship imposed upon them by the Imperium, little knowing, of course, that this cult that is rebelling against this authoritative power are very much Xenos and no longer human. And that is how, in essence, it works in the Fluff. As I say, very thematic army rule in many respects. But how does it work on the battlefield? Well, what I will do is I will just simply read you the rule from here. If you have access to a codex or Wikipedia, then I suggest you get it out and you read along with me. So I hope you're sitting comfortably. And then once we have gone through the rule, I will translate it because it is wordy and it is confusing, to say the least. Cult Ambush. If your army faction is Genestealer cults, each time a unit with this ability is destroyed, roll 1d6. Adding 1 to the result if it is the first or second battle round. On a 5 up, add a new unit to your army identical to your destroyed unit into Cult Ambush at its starting strength all of its runes remaining and any one-shot weapons those models are equipped with considered as not having been shot. Whilst a unit is in Cult Ambush, it is also considered to be in reserves. Then place one Cult Ambush marker anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches horizontally away from all units. If this is not possible, no marker may be placed. Now, the rule goes on a little bit further and we're getting into the second half of the rule, but let's just break that first little bit down before we get kind of lost in all those words. GW certainly does have a way of making things more complicated than they have to be. Basically, your units are recyclable. As they get killed, there is a chance that they will get replaced. Not revived, not resurrected, they're not Lazarus. Okay, when they die, they stay dead. But don't worry, there's always more where they came from. And so to represent this, when a unit dies, you simply roll a d6. Whenever one of your friendly units dies, regardless of course, roll a d6. If it is the first or second turn, you add 1 to whatever you roll on that dice. And if the total is 5 or greater, then that unit that was destroyed is replaced with one that is identical to it at the beginning, essentially on your army list, on your written army list, as it was when it was deployed. Okay, so regardless of whatever casualties you take, regardless of the fact that you may have used one-shot weapons that are in there, demolition charges and that doesn't matter because you're not resurrecting the unit. You're replacing them with an identical unit. That's the key, ultimately. So you just replace them with a clone, if you wish, equipped and loaded up just as the original unit was. And here's the key, as I say, because they are a unit that is replacing the previous one. These are the guys that are seeing the battle go on and are like, yeah, let's join in. Right, we were late, but better late than never, right? Well, to represent the fact that it's not a resurrected unit, they don't come back in where that first unit was destroyed. Instead, they come on from the area of the battlefield that you mark with your Cult Ambush marker. This marker can be anywhere on the battlefield, but you're going to want to hide it, right? Because the unit that is replacing the unit that's destroyed could be killed before it even gets a chance to get on the battlefield. Their tunnels could be collapsed. Bad things could go on. Ultimately, basically, the opponent is going to get a chance to remove that blip off the battlefield. And if they do, you can't bring that unit on in that location, at least anywhere. There are other ways of getting them back, but ultimately, potentially, you will lose that unit. So you want to place that blip in a very defensive area. And that leads us on to the second half of the rules. Let's read it now. And so the army rule continues. If an enemy model, excluding aircraft, ends any kind of move within 9 inches of a Cult Ambush marker that you've placed, that Cult Ambush marker is removed from the battlefield. At the end of the reinforcement step of your opponent's next movement phase, this is the wordy bit, for each of your Cult Ambush markers still on the battlefield, you can select one unit from your army that is in Cult Ambush and set up that unit using that Cult Ambush marker. To do so, set that unit up on the battlefield more than 9 inches away horizontally from all enemy units, with at least one model in the unit touching that Cult Ambush marker and all other models placed wholly within 3 inches of the marker. That Cult Ambush marker is then removed from the battlefield. And so if we were to look at this from a role-playing, thematic, fluff-like perspective, this represents the risk that your reinforcements have to go through to enter the battlefield. There's a chance they might get intercepted before they can come into play. Enemy infantry might pick up their positions using their auspexes and with a deadly volley destroy them before they can enter the battlefield. Tunnels that they are hiding within may be discovered and collapsed with a well-placed crack grenade. The list goes on. You can roleplay it however you want, but ultimately, as I say, what this part of the rule represents is that inherent risk that comes with trying to sneak onto a battlefield ultimately. And the wording of the rules doesn't do it any justice, really. It's very complicated. And there are exceptions that have been discussed within the FAQ to just confirm what is a movement and so on and so forth. So let's surmise. Basically, when you place that blip on the battlefield, you're not going to be able to bring in any reinforcements via that blip until the end of the reinforcement step of your opponent's next movement phase. So the opponent will always get a chance to remove that blip before you get to use it, because it is removed when one of their units moves within 9 inches of that blip. If by the end of their movement phase they haven't moved into that 9-inch bubble, that 9-inch radius around the ambush marker, then of course then you can bring on your reinforcements, which at that point you have to place the unit so that it is at least one model in that unit is touching the marker and the rest are within 3 inches. And on top of that, none of the members of that unit can be placed within 9 inches of an enemy unit. So there's a lot of caveats to getting it to work, and blips are quite hard. Blips is just another term that Genestealer Quartets use, by the way. It essentially comes from, the Aliens film, Aliens 2, the on the motion sensors. Essentially is what we're referring to. But so if I say blip, I mean cult ambush marker. So if working with these blips, they are hard to get off. They are difficult. They're very difficult, but it is not that hard at the same time to get them to work. You just have to place them in fairly conservative areas that are surrounded typically by your own troops. Okay, so yes, you could be quite ambitious and place the marker within the enemy deployment zone next to their home objective, but the chances of them getting rid of it are very high. Risk and reward in that case. But and if they're silly enough to have left their backfield open, fantastic, you've got an opportunity there. But the majority of the time you're going to be having to place it in your own defensive areas, and that kind of makes sense. Reinforcements are only going to get the bottle. I'm going to have the balls to come out and support your cause when they feel safe to do so. There might be reinforcements waiting in the opponent's backfield, but they ain't going to come out for, as I say, within those fluff regions, because they know they're going to get shot to pieces before they get a chance to join the main battle if they're isolated. So the rule's quite nice in how it represents that, and it gives the opponent a chance to get rid of your blips. Now, here's the thing. You could say, oh, God, not only do I have to roll a 5 up, or 4 up if, it's the first couple of turns, right? Well, not only do I have to do that, but then I have to place a blip and not get it removed. Yeah, you know what? This is Genestealer Cults, guys. You've come to the wrong army if you want an easy-to-use army. This is a very hard-to-use army. It's for very much people who want to get involved in the rules as much as possible and have a cerebral game. These aren't Space Marines. They don't smash everything they come up against, and so you're going to have to, it's definitely the thinking man's army, let's put it that way. But if you do like chess, if you wish, if you do like planning ahead, just like the Genestealer Cults in the Fluff plan generations ahead, you can actually use these blips to your advantage also, because at the end of the day, the enemy's going to want to get rid of them so that you can't bring a 140 or 200 or potentially even a 300 point unit back onto the battlefield. If your aberrants get destroyed and you're lucky and you get that 5 up and you bring 10 aberrants back, that's 300 point unit that's coming back for nothing. Well, they're going to want to get rid of that. Okay. But you can use that to psychologically mess your opponent up. You can place it in a position that's going to make them isolated. You want to draw their units into a certain area, place a blip there. The chances are they're going to go after it, and if that pulls them away from an objective, yes, they might take out the blip, but they might lose the game because they're not controlling a primary objective. Sometimes they have to make choices and decisions, especially small elite armies like Custodes. You know, they don't have the numbers to cover the entire battlefield. It's a little harder to use against Orcs, Tyrannid, Guard, you know, things like this. But Eldar, even though they're not a horde army, you know, and have a lot of ball control with numbers, they've got the ability to get into places where you don't want them. So, but nonetheless, with small elite armies, this particularly works well because you can draw their lines thin. And even though you may lose the ambush marker and you might not be able to get that unit back, as I say, there are ways of trying to get them back even without a marker, or, you know, creating new markers or whatever, you know, when other units die and you give priority to the units that you want to bring back. There are some shenanigans that you can play, but even if you lose a unit, sometimes that in its own right is a worthy sacrifice. And so that's why I enjoy using Genestealer Corps, as I say, because they're a cerebral army, and what may at first appear to be a disadvantage, oh, you know, I've got to go through this hoop and that hoop to be able to just get a small unit back. But no, actually, you know, there are ways of using the blips, as I say, to your advantage. Anyway, we're still discussing what the rule is and does. We've kind of covered it all there. There's just one little minor caveat to add before then I give my review on whether this is a decent rule or not, or actually how it's better than it, as I say, it first seems, especially compared to the index version of this rule, which was a little bit better. But we'll get into that in a minute. The only other caveat to add is that characters that are attached to the unit, if they die, they die. As they say in a Rocky 4, is it? If Dolph Lundgren's character, if he dies, he dies. It's as simple as that, guys. If you lose your characters, they don't come back. The rule would be amazing if it worked on characters. It would be S tier, beyond S tier, but it doesn't work on characters. I mean, you just bring every independent operative that you could, you know, lone operative. You just bring them all onto the battlefield because, you know, the chances of even just getting a couple of them back would be really profound. But they make it clear, characters don't come back. And so now that we know what the rule is, and we've kind of translated it from GW speak into English, into understandable English at least anyway, and even given a sort of thematic role-playing aspect to it, which I enjoy to do. You know, the reason we all get into this game is because we all have imagination, right? You want to be seeing how it would be on the battlefield, and I hope that just gives you a little perspective on how it would thematically work, and of course you can create your own scenarios also. But now we get to the nitty-gritty of, you know, tournament play and things like this. Is this rule any good? Will it have any reasonable effect on the battle? Or is it the wooden spoon and rule of commiseration? Well, listen, there's a lot of disappointed people out there. There's a lot of people that feel that this rule has been downgraded, and downgraded unnecessarily so from the 10th edition index that was released at the beginning of the edition. In the beginning of the, you know, as I say, 10th edition, our rule was basically the same, but battle line units got +1 on their dice roll to get onto the battlefield. So battle line units were actually really, you know, actually the odds were in their favour in the first 2 turns to come back if they did get destroyed. And it really did create, you know, that sort of feeling that these guys, they're just not stopping. They really want this planet. They really want us dead, you know, for the opponent. It really could psychologically get to them where, oh, they've destroyed it. And, oh, and it's back. Oh, and guess what? I'm back again. And that could overwhelm psychologically your opponent. As I say, Genestealer cults are a cerebral army. They're the thinking man force of 40k. And part of that is playing not only rules on the battlefield, but psychological games with your human opponent. It can be very fun indeed. But, you know, it has been downgraded. As I say, that extra bonus that battle line units get, now they no longer get that. And what a shame. In my opinion, was it needed? No, it was not. But here's the thing. We lost that rule, and for compensation for that, our units did go down in points. Now, part of the reason our units went down in points is because there were other nerfs here and there. Okay, so if we look at Aberrants, they went down in points and not enough points because their data sheet itself was heavily changed, but they have not been affected by this change in the army rule either. So if we look at the ones that have been affected, the battle line units, you've got neophytes, they've gone down in points, but their mining lasers and their weapon options have kind of been, you know, messed up basically because of the way that you can only field what's in the box basically, because they've only got 2 mining lasers and 2 seismic cannons and things like this in the box for a unit of 20. Well, that's all you can bring, whereas before you could bring 4 of each, or well, 4 of one or the other. Now you have to bring 2 of each. So the unit is a little less specialized than it used to be, or has the capacity to be a little less specialized than it used to be. But when you do the math crunch on that, when you go onto the sites and, you know, you put all the formulas in and that, and to work out how much damage you can do, it actually makes very little difference. So yes, it's a little annoying, you can lose out on certain areas, but overall you've still pretty much got a very similar damage output you did before. On paper it looks horrible, but realistically speaking it doesn't really make much of a difference. And so you could argue that the points have gone down partly because of that, and also because, as I say, with neophytes specifically, their mining lasers have had strength reductions. I think they're no longer strength 12, they're instead strength 10. That's a huge change. But again, the points reduction, guys, that came from the index to where we are now. For a unit of 20, a unit of 20 is 40 points cheaper, or a unit of 10 is 20 points cheaper. That's a significant reduction. So much so that if, you know, in all of my army lists, I always try and bring, where possible, 3 units of 20 neophytes. Well, over those 3 units now, I'm getting 120 points back just for fielding the same units that I had before. 120 points gets me a rock grinder, gets me 2 characters. It pretty much pays for another unit. That, just from those units alone that I was bringing anyway, just having that reduction makes a big difference. And if you look at it from this perspective, a unit of 20 neophytes costs 140 points, right? The chances are I can find 20 points very easily in my army, because the way that 10th edition works, with equipment no longer having, you know, costs, so you don't have to pay for the equipment that your characters have, for the special weapons and heavy weapons that your units have. It kind of means it's very difficult for you to actually get bang on, say, 2,000 points. Chances are you've only got 1990 or 1980. You're probably going to be a little bit on the short side anyway. So finding 20 points, that ain't that much of a big deal, right? And so instead of having 3 units of neophytes, I can now have 4. And that kind of mitigates just a little bit the reduction or in the reliability of the caught ambush rule for battle line units. Why? Because now I get 4 rolls instead of 3, because I've got 4 units can be destroyed. So if all 4 of them are destroyed, I've got 4 chances of bringing them back instead of 3. Now don't get me wrong. You can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. Our rule has been diminished. It's not as good as it used to be, but the fact that our units are cheaper, and as a result we can field more on the battlefield, and that helps. But, you know, it's still leaving a bit of taste in our mouths, isn't it, guys? You know, if you're a Genestealer cult player, you're not going to be happy with that change, because it wasn't an overpowering ability anyway. As I mentioned before, you've got to go through a lot of hoops to be able to put down these new units. Even if you're lucky enough to get the roll, you still got to put the blips, and the opponent can, most likely a canny opponent can get rid of them. Right, so yeah, rule not as good as it used to be, but here's the sort of indirect improvement that I've seen in the rule, and it's a big one. Are you ready? Well, here we go. So in the most recent balanced data slate, which was in June 2024, GW introduced a sort of change in sort of the circumstances that you can use certain stratagems, and I will quote it here. This is for stratagems that add new units to your army, and they've changed it as so. If a stratagem has the effect of adding a new unit to your army that is identical to your destroyed unit, i.e. join the hunt, unending waves, reinforcements, etc., etc., add the following restriction to the stratagem. You can only use this stratagem once per battle. Oh my god, guys, that was huge. Now, I don't just play Genestealer Corps, I play Guard also. Guard and World Eaters. World Eaters aren't affected by this, but Guard really are, because they have a stratagem called Reinforcements, and that stratagem cost 2 command points, but allowed you to bring, in the same way that we can, a new unit back onto the battlefield that's destroyed, essentially a clone unit. Now, it came with 100% certainty of working, but it cost 2 command points. Now, yes, Guard had ways of doing that for free, and potentially even doing that, I think it was even twice in a turn, you know, so they could really abuse that. And it weren't just a Guard, you know, there were several armies out there that could do this. And having that ability to do this every turn, turn in, turn out, as long as you got the command points, you can do what essentially is our army special rule, but just better, with none of the caveats, none of the hoops to jump through, none of the bloody restrictions. You just have to spend a command point cost that, as I say, you can reduce or even negate to 0 with certain characters like Creed and stuff. Well, you know, that really made our army ability seem slightly lackluster, didn't it? But now, with that new addition to the rule, and this is why I say that our army rule has now become a lot better than people realise. Yes, it's got worse on paper, but now we're the only army, the one and only army in the entire game that can recycle its units, turn in, turn out, turn in, turn out. And units that die, they can keep dying and keep coming back. I mean, it's not just like it's once per unit. Every single one of our units can die 2-3 times in a game, and as long as we've got enough turns, we can keep bringing them back as long as we get those rolls. And we have ways of, you know, improving our chances of getting those rolls as well in certain detachments. So actually, our army rule, yes, is weaker, but when you consider the grand scheme of things, it's actually quite spicy. And Genestealers, cults, you know, we like spicy things. We like to be spicy, and that makes us unique. More importantly, it adds zest to our army that no other army can replicate anymore. Well, they can for a turn, but it ain't really worth it anymore. You know, the kind of units you would use this on, you wanted to do every turn. You know, your Krieg guardsmen and stuff. You know, you wanted to keep bringing them back because it was just demoralizing. And, you know, you could lose 240 guardsmen in one game, but you could still end up with 240 guardsmen on the battlefield by the end of the game. It was ridiculous. People were abusing it. And I'm kind of glad that in some ways, as a guard player I'm not, but as a Genestealer cultist, as I say, I'm very glad that GW have reined things in just a tiny wee bit. Because it makes our army actually better than you realise. That army rule is fantastic when you consider it now within the grand scheme of things, because we're the only ones that can do it. Anyway, guys, I felt I've talked enough on what is just one simple rule. We will be coming back and we'll be looking at detachments in our next few videos, and I'm probably going to start with the biosantic broodsurge, which is a detachment I'm really looking forward to being using on the battlefield. Very exciting army list, and you know, again, it's had some flack, and I'm going to be going over that, and I'll be kind of countering the argument, saying people, it's a bit boring, it's a bit one-dimensional. No. There's actually quite a bit to this this particular detachment. I think it could be really, really good, but that's a story for another time. In the meantime, guys, thank you very much for listening. I'm Big Al. Thank you for coming to Nerdvana, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.